Hello everyone, and welcome once again to our For the Health of It show. I'm Lou Beccaria, your host and producer, and so glad to have you with us once again. Our health topic today is about providing self-care for those of us who may be caregivers in any aspect of our daily life. Often, the physical and emotional health of those performing caregiver roles is overlooked, even by those who are actually providing the caregiving. Here today to help us have a better understanding of the importance of self-care for caregivers and the importance of mindfulness in the process is Leslie Peters. Leslie is a registered nurse with 30 years experience as an obstetrics nurse dealing with clients who have a history of trauma. She's also a motivational speaker, a consultant, and a self-love strategist and accountability partner in self-care. So without further ado, welcome.
Hey,
Leslie.
Lou.
Glad to have you on the show here today.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today.
So this is a very important topic, and I think it's becoming more important like every year. But first, tell us just a little bit about your background, and then we're going to get into some of these powerful questions that you have.
Yes. So let me see. I'm a registered nurse. I went to school, University of Miami and Penn State, and I've been a registered nurse for 30 years. The first half of my career I spent in a hospital, acute care, working in OB, and then the latter half was in home care in lower income areas in Philadelphia.
Okay.
And through both those, I took care of women who had a history of like childhood adversity. Mm-hmm. You know, they had a story like all of us do. But between them, the nurses, and myself, I realized how self-care was kind of neglected. And so that's where I put my efforts into.
So what do you mean when you say that everybody has a story, has a self-story?
Well, you know what, it's funny, I came up with self-care starts with this story. And I did that when I was looking at nurses because the way we treat ourselves is a result of our childhood experiences and what we believed or who we believed we had to be in order to gain like love or acceptance from our parents. Mm-hmm. And so usually that we can often put ourselves last to please others, to earn their love. What we think, it's a story we tell ourselves. So that's why I mean self-care starts with the story.
Okay, so it goes beyond, you know, the economic situation that you're born into or the educational situation.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Good.
absolutely.
Now, I've often heard you say in the past that our self-stories have a cost. And what does that mean?
So the cost to self-care is, you know, neglect yourself long enough, and not only does it usually show up physically, whether it be obesity, you're not taking care of yourself, you don't eat right, it shows up emotionally too, because many times when you are giving and you don't feel receiving because you don't give to yourself, then what happens is there's like this deep-seated anger and resent that builds up, and you don't even know it builds up over the years. Mm-hmm. So that's when you take a look at what does it cost you? Like, what does it cost? Ignoring yourself, both physically and emotionally, what does it cost you on your emotional health, you know?
Is another way of saying that people get burned out being caregivers, or can get burned out being caregivers?
Yeah, you can get burned out, you know, and there's a difference too. There's burnout and there's compassion fatigue. Burnout is just like you can't take anymore, you've done. Compassion fatigue is more of something where you're being so empathetic and taking on people's troubles that's more of an emotional. Burnout is almost more of a physical exhaustion. Like you can't do anymore. And
how can people actually avoid that? For those who are caregivers, how can they avoid that kind of burnout, that feeling I can't go anymore? How do you replenish yourself while you're in the process of being a caregiver?
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, the first thing is to be like really make an intention to fill your cup back up while you're emptying it, right? Oh. And so, like, and the cup being ourselves. Like, if you give and give and give, that's fine, but you've got to balance and replenish within yourself so that you can give more.
So,
right?
what are some of the ways in which the average person could fill up the cup, as you said?
You know, you can do, in my opinion, there's a difference between self-care and self-love, right? Self-care is doing things that make you feel good and bring you joy. So for emotional or your mental health, I'd say what you and I did before, the breathing is huge. And people, including myself before I was trained in meditation, I didn't realize that half the day I was holding my breath, right? So when you're breathing, you want to take a nice full breath, not necessarily deep, full, and you just do that for a few minutes. I try to tell people, associate it with something you do on an hourly basis, whether it be like if you're driving and get in your car, but just something to remind you to actually breathe. Because what that does is it kind of just stills your mind, which is really important to get within yourself. Other things you can do are, go to the gym, go for a walk. There's nothing new in that. Journaling if you want to journal. Getting hair done, nails done, that's not really self-care. Self-care is more like filling yourself up emotionally, and getting your mindset that you're protected from all the stuff that goes on in the world.
And I guess it would involve maybe getting a substitute caregiver for an evening so you could go out to a play in a restaurant.
Absolutely.
And enjoy yourself socially.
Absolutely.
Okay, and not feel guilty about it.
And not feel guilty. That's the thing. And that goes back to the story, too, because how many times when you were growing up that, people made you feel guilty if you put yourself first. You were called selfish, or at least I was in my family. And so we get that mindset that if we take care of ourselves, that we're being selfish. And it's totally opposite. Like that old adage saying that you have to put the oxygen mask on first. When you're on an airplane, they tell you, put it on first before your kids, because you need to be good so you can be good for other people.
Okay. That's what you meant by oxygen.
That's what I meant, yeah.
Okay.
So, and our first instinct is to give to others first and then ourselves. But what we have to realize, even as a parent, you have to take care of you first, because if you're not good, then you're not going to be as effective in helping other people.
Yeah. Our viewers may think that we're only talking about people who in a family situation, caring for an elderly parent or for a child maybe who has a disability or something, or it takes a lot of time. But this also applies to professional people who are in a giving profession, like social workers or even your own as a registered nurse. So
yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? I mean, you actually experienced it probably.
Yeah, you know what? It was funny because I always did do like self-care. I wasn't aware I was doing it. I was just lucky in that. So I was able to give and still refill myself. But I think that's because for me, what fills me, what brings me joy, is connection with people. So you had that balance, right? Like as long as you do something that brings you joy, simultaneously while you're doing something that brings you stress.
And I guess, you kind of hit on a point that I would imagine that people who are caregivers have a tendency to maybe isolate themselves because they're so consumed with the caregiving.
Yes.
That those of us who are caregivers need to maintain social relationships with friends and relatives and so forth.
Yeah, you know what? Time alone, though, isolating, that is, like for me, I'm an introvert. Yeah.
Never would have guessed that.
I know, I am an introvert. But what that means is like when I go to conferences or wherever and they say, use your time off to network. No, I got to go by myself and just fill back up and take a breath, because there's so much that goes into that conversation. So in answer to your question, yes, keeping social, just being amongst people, right?
Yeah.
But it is also important to have quiet time. That's what meditation, mindfulness, it actually stem from. It's just taking time throughout the day to quiet your mind. Sitting in quiet is really hard to do, but once you do it, it's really nice. You look forward to it.
What are some of the typical ways, Leslie, that people could employ mindfulness? We hear that a lot these days, the concept of mindfulness. But what are some of the strategies or ways in which to do that?
So mindfulness is pretty much just, it's living in the moment. It's being aware of where you are now. So as we're having this conversation, if you're talking to someone, try not to keep your mind like on your to-do list, right? Like just
Be in the moment.
Be in the moment. Be present wherever you are. And a funny story about mindfulness. I think I did mindfulness most of my life, but when I learned about mindfulness, I tried to do it, and I don't. So I was being really mindful downtown. I'm driving, I'm looking, I'm admiring the structure, buildings, and all of a sudden I look, I was going the wrong way down one-way street. And I'm like, so much for mindfulness. Got to pay attention to the signs. But yeah, I mean, mindfulness is just being, it's like saying, I'll tell you what, the greatest, they talk about gratefulness, right? And if all things I've done besides breathing, gratefulness is, being grateful is the thing that has changed my mind shift so much. And what I mean by that is just during the day, like if I get a great parking space, I'll be like, thank you. Green light, thank you. And
So is that an aspect of mindfulness? Is that what you're
yeah,
trying
my
to convey?
interpretation of it, yes.
Yeah.
I think it is. Mindful, as I said, is just being aware you are and appreciating the moment for what it is. Because as you do, the whole idea behind gratitude is that when you start being grateful or thanking for what is good, then you kind of stop focusing on what's bad.
Yeah.
Right? Like we always focus on what's bad.
So it's a positive attitude toward life.
It's just noticing what's going right instead of what's going wrong.
Yeah.
And that's huge, particularly when you're in a position with caregivers, you know, not if you're doing it professionally, because that's by choice, but if you are taking care of a parent or a child and you kind of feel stuck doing it, right? That's not healthy. That's not good. Because then you feel like you don't have choice and you don't have power in a situation. So that's where mindfulness, I'll tell you, mind shift, real quick story, I know, but I had a situation where an aunt I was going to have to take guardianship for. I did not want to take guardianship. Nothing, it was a Friday afternoon, we couldn't find a nursing home placement. She had been deemed incompetent. Anyhow, someone said to me, why don't you think about it as being your choice to take guardianship? And I went, okay, I'll try it. Went for a walk. Said, it's my choice, I choose to do this, I choose to do this. No lie, as soon as I got back from the walk, I got a call from the social worker. She goes, don't even ask me how this happened, I don't know, but come in, your aunt's lucid right now, get guardianship, and then we have a place for her to go in like tomorrow. And I'm going, oh my gosh, like it's just...
It's almost like a miracle happened.
It's almost like a miracle because there was no explanation, but what it is I gave myself power instead of feeling like a victim that I had to take care of someone that I didn't want to.
Yeah.
I changed it up, that it was my choice to do it because have you ever had a job which you couldn't stand and you hated going? Probably not. Yes?
Well,
okay.
a summer job in college.
So you know how you kind of get like, oh, I don't want to go, I don't want to go. And you just get yourself in this mindset. So if you're taking care of someone and you're like, I don't want to, I want to do this, I want to do this. That's just going to make your self-care and your filling up harder to do.
Yeah, good. We're going to take a break for commercial right now. You've been listening to Leslie Peters, who is a registered nurse, a self-care strategist and consultant, motivational speaker, and we're learning a lot about taking care of ourselves. So we're going to take a break for commercial, everyone. Please stay with us, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to For the Health of It. For those of you who may be just tuning in, we have the pleasure today of talking with Leslie Peters, who is a registered nurse with 30 years experience dealing with people in trauma, and she's also a life coach, strategist in self-care matters, and we're really learning a lot about how to take care of ourselves. So, and when we ended the first segment for commercial, you were talking about how thinking positively about your role will actually empower you. And then it seems to me that that's like the exact opposite of what some people who are caregivers may fall into, being a victim.
Yes, I'm so glad. So I do want to clarify that. So yes, when you get stuck in a situation that you don't necessarily want to be in, you can feel like a victim, right? And a victim is just going to, it's not going to help you fill your cup. It's going to drain your cup. And when you feel like a victim, you have like this, you end up, particularly if it's you're caring for a parent, I've learned a lot, is that you end up feeling really angry and resentful down deep.
Right.
And so by shifting your mindset and just being thankful and grateful, then our power as people is in our choice.
Yeah. And I guess if people start to feel resentful, taken to the extreme, it could turn into abuse of the person
it can.
that you're taking care of.
Yeah, it can. I'll tell you what, one of the things, and both my parents are gone, but how well do you know your parents as people? Not in the role they play, but how well do you know? Did you know your mom or dad as people before they were a parent? And so I think if you're taking care of an elderly parent, this can be an amazing time to really get to know.
As a person.
As a person.
Not in a role.
Yeah, and actually the conversations that I do, the conversations from the heart, where I ask people questions about who they are, I often thought that would be amazing for someone at the end of their life, particularly if you're diagnosed with dementia, right? You could leave a legacy.
Yeah.
But you can, more than any physical care you're doing, if you were to really be interested and learn and develop that deep connection with the person who's aged, right, or who's ailing, what a gift. More than the physical care. Letting someone know that you really see them and hear them, that's priceless.
Now, Leslie, you mentioned conversations of
From the heart.
From the heart.
From the heart.
And I know that in your way of thinking, HEART is an acronym.
Yes,
So
yes.
if you could tell us what that acronym of HEART means.
HEART means honesty, or it stands for honesty, empathy, acceptance, relatability, and trust. And it came from somebody asked me once to teach people what I do. And I said, what do I do? I don't even know I do. And so it was the way that I can approach strangers and do things that are kind of weird to other people, but to connect me with people. And so I realized that those were the qualities or the characteristics that you need. And those characteristics would be awesome to do now.
Why are those particular characteristics, Leslie, so important?
So I found that when you come from a place of honesty, when you're empathetic, and just to clarify, empathy is like me saying to you, I get it, and I'm there for you. Sympathy is like, you poor thing. Sympathy is super judgy, right? It makes people feel bad. Yeah. Empathy makes someone feel supported. And so empathy is important. Acceptance is just accepting where people are, and relatability is I always, ever since I was a kid, whoever I see on the streets or whatever, I always go, I wonder what they have in common with me. Do they have kids? Do they have problems with their kids? Because that, and what HEART did with the relatability, and then trust is the last piece. And that means trust until proven you can't. And then trust still, but be cautious.
Trust the other person or trust yourself?
Everybody. Trust yourself, trust the world, come from a basis of trust. And so, but what I realized living with HEART did to me is it truly gave me the ability to see beyond the exterior and to see beyond, and to hear beyond words, and to see, I always thought if everyone lived with HEART, those characteristics, then we'd have such a more peaceful world.
Yeah. Why do we have such a hard time as people with the concepts of self-love and self-care, both as individuals when we're in our private lives caring for people, and as professionals, those who are in caring professions?
You know what, I think, and it does, HEART initially, I came up with the acronym to deal with other people, to extend HEART to others. But I found out in the past year, HEART is really what we need towards ourselves first. And I think the reason that we don't have HEART towards ourselves is most everyone I've talked to comes out of childhood with some false belief that they're not worthy, they're not valuable.
Baggage,
right? And so we put this mask on to become somebody to make somebody else happy, right? Everyone walks around and they're not being true to who they really are. And what I learned through myself is in times in life where I wore that mask and I wasn't true to myself, it ended up, I was really angry, resentful, and shameful because I felt betrayed and abandoned, not by anyone else, but by me. So when you ask why we have these issues, I think it's because a long time ago, whenever we're not true to who we are, we're abandoning and betraying who we are as people. So we don't trust ourselves, we doubt ourselves, we don't feel we're worthy. You know, so living life with heart, and I added the freedom to just be. I think a lot of issues we deal with when we make things about us, it's because we're actually just really not happy with ourselves, and we need to just be who we are.
With regard to the A in heart, the acceptance, I guess it's you're saying it's important. Let's say, for example, you're a caregiver for somebody with dementia, to understand them in their dementia state and not in their former state as, quote, a normal person without dementia. And I guess that takes a little bit of self-discipline in order to be able to educate yourself and say, this isn't the person that I was used to 10 years ago before they had dementia. I have to relate to them in a different way.
Yeah, it does. And you know, being a caregiver for a parent's really tough, especially if that parent and you don't feel it's the greatest parent.
Yeah, it's a reversal of roles.
It's a reversal of roles. And so what can happen though is the acceptance piece is, yes, accepting them and not looking back and wishing things were the way it was. Right? Yeah. But it's also accepting yourself.
Good. We're going to take a break for another commercial. Folks, we've been dealing with Leslie Peters. Fascinating discussion on self-care, self-love. When we come back, we're going to hear more from Leslie and get into some pretty deep questions. So stay with us. We'll be right back after commercial. Hi, welcome back to For the Health of It. For those of you who are just tuning in to this segment, we have the pleasure today of talking with Leslie Peters, who is a registered nurse, a person who has been in practice for 30 years, a lot of times dealing with people with trauma, and she's kind of developed a specialty in teaching us about self-love and self-care. So, Leslie, can caregivers sometimes feel guilt and shame about their role, resenting the person that they're actually supposed to be the caregiver for?
Yeah, they can, because if you have someone who requires a lot of your care and you have to sacrifice part of what you want to do for them, you can start feeling really angry and resentful. And then because you go, oh my God, this is someone I love, like how can I feel this way? That's where the guilt comes. And so I just want to let people know who are in that situation, that's a normal feeling. That's a normal feeling. You know, so don't judge yourself for feeling that way. It's just when you do start to feel that way, that means even go out for a walk. Just get out of the physical environment where you are. You know, if your mind takes you down that rabbit hole of getting really angry and resentful. But that is a normal feeling.
Now, I was a caregiver with my mom, who lived to be 95 and a half years old, but I'm an only child, okay? But for those that are caregivers and they have brothers and sisters who aren't pulling their weight, so to speak, how do caregivers deal with that? You
know, another thing, so it doesn't pent up within the caregiver, you have to say something to a family member, and not nastily. Like people, I think what happens is we hold things in so long, then when it comes out like in not a therapeutic way to say someone. But if I had a brother or sister and I'd say, look, I need help. And don't be afraid, we're afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. If they say no, don't take it personally either.
And would it be important if someone has not been involved for a couple of years, for example, to just ask them to do one small thing and then maybe graduate up from that?
It's always, you know what, when you have a conversation with someone and it may be an uncomfortable conversation, try to avoid the word you, right? So like, you haven't done this, because obviously when you
accusatory.
Say, yes, it's accusatory. If you say like, I'm feeling this, it usually is better received, because like no one can argue with your feelings. They're your feelings, right? So I'm having a hard time and I need some help. You know.
Let me just break off for a second and say, just concentrate on you for a second. What brought you to develop this specialty, Leslie, from your 30-year career as an obstetrics nurse and dealing with a lot of people with trauma?
You know, my own personal experience, I felt like I was supposed to be doing something different in life and speaking, and so I quit work to pursue. It wasn't even a business; it was a message, a mission, you know. And over the last 2 years, I've learned all these pieces, and I realized I'd never felt quite comfortable going out talking about heart because I knew there were times I did not live with heart with my family. And that's when I came up with the piece. I realized I had a lot of anger and shame within me. And I went, but I'm not mad at anyone else. And I was mad at me because I didn't have my own back.
Yeah.
Like I changed who I was to please my dad and my mom and my ex-husband.
Yeah.
You know, and that stays with you, and that leads to a lot of self-doubt and self-trust, lack of self-trust.
Is there such a thing, Leslie, as unhealthy caregiving?
There
and
is.
If so, how does it impact self-care?
There is, because particularly, and this is where self-care starts with the story, right? So if you grew up, particularly with a parent with like some type of substance abuse, there's a very manipulative mindset of addiction that comes with addiction. And you may end up caring for others because that's where you feel your worth is in, right? If you cared for a parent when you were a child, if you end up taking a caretaker role and being the parent, then a lot of times we equate our self-worth and our identity with being a caregiver. And if you do that, then you just give and give and give and never fill because you need to be needed. That's who you are. And I experienced that when I quit work, to be honest with you. I kept myself from people for probably a good year, like helping people. Because I wanted to make sure when I helped, it was because I wanted to, not because I needed to.
Yeah.
When you want to help, you'll take care of yourself. When you need to help, you ignore yourself.
So the whole movement that you're trying to get started of self-love and self-care is not just academic or theoretical with you. You lived it.
Oh, I lived it, yeah. I mean, I'm one of those, and that's why I had a hard time until I figured out it would boil down to self, because I need to walk my talk. Like, if I'm going to advise someone to do something else, I better well tried it and know it works. And that's the only way I can do it. So yes, this is all through personal experience.
Yeah.
It's all, so, you know, and again, when I first started, it was, I saw all the problems in the world that all boiled their anger, and I think it all goes down to some deep hidden hurt. And at the end of the day, I think people are really just angry with themselves because we don't allow ourselves to be true to who we are.
Another question that just occurred to me is, in this whole process of developing self-love and the role of self-care, I would assume that it's important not to, while you're being a caregiver, to be working out issues about yourself that may impact how you caregive?
So you're saying it's important not to, is your question?
Yeah.
No, I think it's actually, you know, self-awareness and finding out who you are. And that's what happened with those conversations from the heart that we were talking about, is I started doing with these and people started making major changes in their lives, like lower income women. They're moving out of the hood. And I'm like, I called them and they're like, well, I heard myself talk and I started to learn things about myself. So I think that going through this process of uncovering yourself, that's an everyday thing for your entire life, you know, because then if you can look at yourself as like kind of an objective observer, but when you're feeling these things, like if I'm taking care of an aging parent and I'm feeling these things, I would discuss it with them. Say, look, I just want to let you know I'm feeling like really angry and resentful, and I'm sorry because I love you. And 10 to 1, when you're vulnerable and you share something that you're afraid you're going to be judged for sharing, in my experience, 9 out of 10 people are going to come back and say, I know I felt the same way at some point.
Is it a positive or a negative, Leslie, to share your feelings as a caregiver with the person when you're having issues, right? You know,
I think
with the person you're caregiving, you're giving care for?
I think it's positive as long as it's positive as long as it's coming from a place of love. If you've been hanging on to some anger and things you want to say, and then all of a sudden you say them, it's going to come out the wrong way as anger and hurtful.
Yeah.
But if it comes from a place of love, I think it's very therapeutic. And you're also, when you share something that you're afraid to say, right? You're giving that person you're sharing it with permission to also share. And I say, like, shed the shame, win the game, right? Like,
Shed the shame and win,
win
the
the
game.
game.
That could be a tongue twister.
but like, no negative emotion is good kept within.
Yeah.
You know?
We just have maybe a minute and a half left, but for those of our viewers who may have just tuned in to the third segment, earlier you mentioned about putting on a oxygen mask,
Yes.
Which is pretty interesting. So for the benefit of those who tuned in late.
So I was just saying that when you get on an airplane, they always tell you to put the oxygen mask on yourself first. And particularly as a parent or whatever, we'd want to give it to our child first. The reason we have to put on ourselves first is because if you want to be the best for somebody else, you first have to be the best for you.
Right.
So you got to meet your needs first, emotional and physical, and then you can give to someone else.
Okay. One last question. Tips. Give me a few little tips. Is it your tip would be to have people practice heart?
Yes. The tip would be, first of all, start breathing, right? Like, because that really does. I've had people taken from having the beginning of an anxiety attack and breathing, and they're like, oh my God, it's like this awesome feeling, right? And the way you breathe is just, it's a full cycle. Maybe we can end the show with the breathing, right? But breathing, and start noticing when you got to start listening to your body, right? So if you feel like all of a sudden like this feeling in your gut, stop and take notice of what triggered that.
Okay, great.
So,
we're out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lou. It was a pleasure.
And an honor to talk with you and learn about
It was awesome.
self-care and
And
self-love.
thank you, everyone out there. They can call me if they have questions. I'll be more than happy.
Yeah, they will see the information on the lower third here. So
So,
that's about all the time that we have for the show, folks. I want to thank Leslie, as we've just done, who's just shared a wealth of knowledge about self-care for caregivers and how important it is to love ourselves if we're going to be a caregiver. Until next time, I'm Lou Beccaria, and remember, folks, if you're healthy, you're wealthy. So long, we'll see you next time.